Welcome to the second episode of Series 6, everyone. We promise we'll get to actually create characters in this episode. We can't wait to introduce you to our amazing people. But first, as usual, let's get a couple announcements out of the way.
Just a reminder, we started our brand new Discord server just last week. We have been having some great conversations in there, some really weird conversations, and some pretty good ideas already. So if you are not on board, please head on over to discord.charactercreationcast.com and log in. We would really love a chance to get to talk to you.
Yeah, that would be wonderful to have as many of you in there as we can fit. And I believe Discord can fit a lot.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Also, if you like what you are hearing, there are a few ways to support us. First off, the One Shot Podcast Network has a Patreon. You can head on over to patreon.com/oneshotpodcast to sign up for that. And if you go for the $5 tier or above, then you can get access to the Secret Archive, where you will soon have our own content in there. And it's going to be pretty fantastic.
A reminder to everybody that I will be at Gen Con this year. I will be part of the One Shot Network panel on Saturday evening, and you can also find me around the convention all weekend. And I would love to meet some of you, so if you are going to be there, please feel free to send me a message on Twitter or on our fancy new Discord server. I would really like a chance to get to know some of you and meet up with people who are just as excited about characters as I am.
Yeah, it's going to be quite the fun time and quite the epic Gen Con with all of the wonderful people that I've heard are going.
All the wonderful people and not Ryan.
I know.
So you know it'll be good. Great, now we can have
I'll
fun.
be there in spirit. I'll be haunting all of you somehow.
Oh, that's spooky. Are you going to be dead? Not that you know of.
I'll figure out astral projection until then. All right. With that out of the way, we do have a review to read. We are down to the last couple, I believe, so if you want to, please leave one. But this one is titled Charming +3, and it's coming from Doc Palindrome from the USA. They say, as a comedian, podcaster, and interviewer, I have full comprehension of how exhausting it can be to try to be endlessly charming, especially when working with a guest. Amelia and Ryan make it look effortless with multiple guests. I guess it helps that, like me, they have some of the warmest, most delightful people in the gaming spaces to join them, and it's also probably a big help that the very concept of a podcast about character creation might be the greatest idea of all time. They bring their knowledge, experience, and, as noted, charm to these in-depth discussions about my personal favorite part of playing tabletop RPGs. I can only hope that I one day become well-regarded enough in gaming spaces that they have me on for a GURPS episode. Ignoring the fact that this sincere review is also a subtle plug for my own stuff, thanks for making this for humans. That is an awesome review. Thank you so much, Doc Palindrome.
I'm also just really impressed that you managed to do a review and a plug, and I feel like you deserve some props for that. Good on you.
I agree.
I know some people don't like that, but A for effort,
Well, when you have such nice things to say as Doc Palindrome did, I don't think a little plug is going to hurt anything.
That's true. Well, thank you so much for your review. And we are, like we said, running a little low on them. So if you have good things to say about our show and or your own show, please leave us a rating or a review. We will be very excited to read it and very excited to share it with all of you.
Which will be extremely soon because there's only 2 left.
Yeah, get on it, folks. All right, with all of that out of the way, let's get to the show.
Yeah, enjoy.
What about abilities? How do abilities work in this game?
Abilities are just sort of the kinds of things that characters can do. we can climb, we can jump, we have language, we have different rates of movement. We have senses that are unique to, well, being human in the case of human characters, but then also in the case of cetacean characters, they have things like echolocation. And then with all the genetic and cybernetic modifications that are part of the setting, you can enhance those in unique, indirect ways, or you can supply completely new senses. So those are all the kinds of things that fall under the abilities category.
Okay. And then what about aptitudes?
Aptitudes are sort of areas of expertise. There's a lot of skills. Again, it's a 90s game, so there's a lot more skills than might be in a more contemporary game. But those are kind of grouped into areas. For example, technology. So the use of technology, computers and damage control and those sorts of things. In real life, we see people that seem to have proclivities with different kinds of things, from artists to athletes to technologists. And then the aptitudes are really just a way to sort of further refine the distinction of your character. If you want to play someone who's good with technology, you have a higher aptitude score of 1 to 3 that governs those skills. But maybe you want to be clumsy. So some of your physical skills would have a lower aptitude. And that number, 1, 2, or 3, determines how many dice you get to roll when you're trying to get a success in a test for that skill group.
Okay.
And you only need basically one dice to roll a success. So say you had an aptitude in technology, but the way that your character points lay out, like you're really good at electronics and mechanics, but maybe you're not, maybe your computer skill is only like a 2.
Yeah.
So on a D10, you're going to try and roll a 2 or less. Well, if your aptitude is 3 dice, your aptitude is 3. You're like, I'm not totally trained in computers, but I know kind of how things work. Like this is a thing that my brain works good at. Then you roll 3 dice, and hopefully one of those 3 dice, gives you a better chance of getting that 2 or less. So that's kind of
increase the pool that you have for the higher attributes or higher aptitudes.
Exactly.
Very cool. Right. And then the last thing that I think we had questions about would be biomods.
Yeah. So again, 90s, cyberpunk, right? You can't have a sci-fi game without body mods. But again, we wanted them to seem like they were realistic. We wanted them to be serve purpose, right? So I don't imagine in a real world someone would be willing to spend that kind of money and that kind of physical trauma to acquire abilities unless they had a valuable purpose, unless there was reason for them to have them. So we tried to create all of the cybernetics and all of the genetic engineered biomods in ways that sort of supported that idea, the supported sort of realistic use, realistic purpose. And of course, there are cosmetic modifications, but primarily they are based on the desire for functionality and in-game effects that would make sense for the characters that are using them.
Okay, cool. Then would there be anything else that you want to add that we may need to know going into character creation?
Yeah, I did want to mention that we make a distinction. So a lot of games like D&D, you pick a race, right? Mm-hmm. In Blue Planet, you pick a species.
Yes.
And again, it's intended to sort of evoke the scientific rigor that we hoped was part of Blue Planet, but it also has specific meaning. The word species has a biological definition. And because of the ubiquitousness of genetic engineering and the fact that some cetaceans have been uplifted and can be played as PCs, distinguishing species seems important.
Yes.
And so there are a number of different species that are modifications of humans. And then, of course, a number of different species that are cetaceans that can be played in the game. And so one of the first choices you make as you go through the character creation outline is your species. And I just wanted to kind of point that out as similar to but distinct from the idea of race in a lot of other games.
Right. All right. Well, with all that said, then let's go ahead and make some people.
Let's make some people.
before we get into creating the characters for this system, Jeff unfortunately had to step away for a work meeting, so he will not be joining us. But he did give us a quick rundown of what his character is going to be. So we can basically play off of that a little bit for when we put our characters together, and what his character kind of means once we get to that point. So we will talk about that in a little bit. But for now, Rich, what is the first thing that we have to do when thinking about creating characters?
Sure. Well, when you get together to play the game, what I've done in most of my games is actually just decide on what level. So there's 3 different role power levels. There's everyday, there's exceptional, and there's elite. And it depends on what kind of game you want to play. The games that I've played have mostly been exceptional, which is kind of right in the middle.
Yeah.
Jeff is big on discussing, both in the book and in person, about the idea that you can have an everyday person hanging out with an elite person in a game, and that's perfectly viable, and you can play the game that way, right?
Yeah.
Because of the way that the game is set up, and I think we're going to discuss this in more detail in the discussion session, the way the game kind of set up, it's not as swingy as some games. So there's not extremities in which, an elite person technically has some more skills and more, a little higher rating in some skills than an everyday person. But the everyday person isn't going to feel like ineffective,
right?
Like around somebody who's elite. So you could technically do a mix and match, or you can mix and match within the system. So the example I've mentioned before, and we'll mention again probably, is the fact that you could play elite characters, but who have the maximum attribute modifications of an everyday person. So someone like an older retired war veteran has all these skills and are very good at these skills, but maybe their physical attributes are slower than they used to be. Right. So you can kind of mix and match those if you want. And that depends on the kind of game that you really want to play. And I think we've agreed to do the exceptional level.
Yeah, definitely. The middle of the road, but still, exceptional.
Right. Yes, exactly. And that just gives you some basic ideas. You have a few points to spend to personalize your attributes. You generally get a certain number of what are called biomods, which are either like technology, like neural jacks and, cybernetic limbs or whatever. It's a cyberpunkish kind of setting, or genetic modifications like enhanced. There's an endocrine system, enhancement you can get that clears poisons out of your system and protects you against disease, things like that.
Right.
It also tells you what aptitudes you get, and aptitudes here, you generally you have a number in a skill. You have a number in a skill that's between 1 and 10 or 0 and 10. Yeah. And you have, you add your attribute to that. So if you are doing a computer's check that you're trying to hack someplace, then, you might use, say, intellect plus your computer skill, right? It's, a lot of systems use that kind of a thing. You come up with a target number, which will be between, again, 0 and 10, and you roll a D10 and you try to get that number or less, right? And the more under the number, the better you do.
Yeah.
Well, aptitude means how many dice you actually roll to try and get that success. So if you have your basic training, then it's just 1 dice. Right. But if you have one of the downsides of the system that's really not a part of the actual mechanics is the language. So there's superior and there's strong. Both of them are S's. Right. Yeah. There's also aptitudes, attributes, and abilities. Mm-hmm. They all start with A's. So those are part of a system that if we do a 3rd edition, then I'd want to be changing those things up because it makes it difficult to know which one you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But superior means you're rolling 3 dice and strong means you're rolling 2 dice. And that's usually for a big group of skills as opposed to a single individual skill. Right. And then it gives you a certain number of points to personalize your skills. And we'll get to that in a minute because your base skills in a bunch of things have to do with the backgrounds that you choose, right? Which is the big part of the character generation aspect of the game, which is fantastic. And then, so the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to choose a species. Now that after you figure out kind of what level you're doing, then you're getting into your personal character. the game itself is a transhumanist game. So a transhumanist game is typically a game like Eclipse Phase or some other game in which we're living in a future in which either genetics or through mechanics or whatever, there's modifications to humans, and humans can modify themselves in some pretty extreme ways compared to how we look at things now.
Right.
So in Blue Planet, you can technically play what's called a pure strain human. There are really no pure strain humans. So a pure strain human is someone who was born without any genetic modifications and has never modified themselves at all in their entire life. That's pretty much not going to happen on Poseidon. You almost need the modifications to survive just on a daily basis. The next thing that's pretty common is a modified human. It's exactly the same thing, except you have some modifications after you were born. So you can develop or attach these gene enhancements or technological enhancements. Mm-hmm. Then you have what's called a genie, which is a human genetic redesign. And that means that you were born with some modifications. So you're maybe what's called an alpha, which is basically a perfected, quote unquote, human. That has better ability scores as a base across the board. They may choose to pick some higher level genetic modifications and things separately, but they're just kind of that human turned up a little bit. Yeah. Right. You also have what are called aquaforms. And so before humans landed on Poseidon for the first time, they genetically modified humans to become one of two types of aquaforms for their colonists. One's called divers and the other one are called squids. That's just their colloquial terms for them. Mm-hmm. A diver is someone who can hold their breath for an hour, has increased myoglobin in their muscles. Basically, they're kind of like the dolphin version of humans. Squids actually can breathe water or breathe air out of the water. So they have basically the equivalent of gills. Some people, when I talk to them, they're like, well, why would you ever pick a diver? I mean, wouldn't you just want to be in the water as long as you want at any time, all the time? Yeah, except the divers have a depth limit because of the way that physiology works and pressure works. The actual squids have a depth limit. They can only go down to about 500 meters, which is still pretty deep. Yeah. But there's some limitations there. Divers can only hold their breath for an hour, but they can go as deep as they want. Basically like sperm whales diving to, into the abyss to hunt down giant colossal squid. They can hold their breath about an hour and a half. So a diver can go down as far as they want without having many or any physiological problems. Squids can stay in the water as long as they want. They just can't go down that far.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Depends on which one you want to do. So those are all the basic variants of humans. And with the amount of modifications, genetic and technological modifications you can make, those are just basic templates.
Yeah.
And you could have a modified human and an alpha human in the same group. And again, the way the system is, you'd think like, oh, I'd always want to play an alpha human, and then because they're just better, and then I'm just going to add a bunch of stuff to that template, and then I'm just going to be great. Well, the difference between an alpha human and a regular human, yeah, there's a difference, but it's not going to play up as much as it would be in another system that would be super swingy, right?
Yeah.
And then there are two non-human species as well that are in the core books, which are cetaceans, bottlenose dolphins, and killer whales, and you can play them as well. And they have a long list of advantages and disadvantages as well. And then Ancient Echoes, which is one of the expansions for the game, one of the supplements, expands out the number of cetaceans to a handful more. So you can play a pilot whale and a beluga whale.
Very cool.
Yeah, it will all have some subtle differences in their culture and their biology and what they do and how they look at the world, which is really pretty cool.
Right, exactly.
And then when you pick those things, when you pick those species, it gives you your basic attributes. So your build, your fitness, your agility, your dexterity, the things that are built into who you are as a body. And you get a couple of points to be able to modify those. They don't go up and down very much. There's a few things that are pretty high or pretty low, depending on what you're playing. But say like a normal human has a 0 in everything.
Yeah.
A Silva, which is I just forgot to mention those. So there's two actual animal hybrids as well. They're humans that have a few genetic traits of a particular animal. And the only ones that became viable after these experiments were Silvas, which are gorilla modifications, and felines or cats.
Yeah.
Which have those modifications as well. A Silva's build is 3. That's pretty buff for a human. In comparison, a killer whale's build is 12 because it's huge, right? But as far as the human variations are concerned, build, for example, means how much muscle mass do you have? Like how much of that physical body do you have to work with?
Right, exactly.
Transhumans have a 1, regular humans have a 0. So you can see how it's not a huge variation.
Yeah, there's even the spacers, and they get a -1.
Yeah, spacers get a -1 on build because they're built lighter to go into 0 gravity. Spacers are built for 0 G. So technically, you could have a game of Blue Planet in which you were never on Poseidon, which is the Blue Planet. You can have something because they mine an asteroid belt as well.
Oh, yeah.
And also, the amount of time it takes to get from Earth to Poseidon is 6 months in space. And so there's there's relay stations on either side of the wormhole that you have to deal with, and you have to go through a lot of physiological issues when you land. They call people who freshly land and come out of the ships have a variety of different nicknames. One of them spotties, because you have these things attached to you that are monitors, but you have those monitors attached to you while you're in this suspended animation for 6 months. You're usually really weak because your muscles have atrophied and you've got these like marks all over you and all. It's really easy to tell when somebody's a newbie landing on the planet, right? But spacers are designed to live and work in 0 G. Yeah.
And they have 4 arms. Like
they do.
Legs are arms. Basically.
Right. Basically their feet have been modified to have opposable thumbs. So because they don't need to walk very much, but their build is a little bit less because they're built lighter. And again, it'll affect certain things in the game, but not a huge amount. So when you're rolling a skill, say you have a skill of 6 in something and you're going to add an ability or an attribute, that attribute, say for example, if it's fitness, well, a spacer has pretty good fitness. They're light, but they're in really good shape and they're modified to be in really good shape. Right. So if you're making a roll plus fitness, then you have a 6 + 1 is 7, and then you're trying to roll a 7 or less on a D10. Okay. Skill tends to override in many cases your attribute. Your attribute kind of adds to it a little bit, but it's just a small variation usually, unless you're a killer whale or an orca, depending on what you're rolling. And that is it. And then there's a few points that you can use to modify those up and down.
Oh, wonderful.
But the biggest thing that's involved in character generation is this thing I alluded to earlier, where you talk about your background and build it up. And there have been other games, particularly around that era, that use this kind of a system in a way, or some variation of the system, like Traveler is notorious for being able to die in character generation because you're rolling on all these tables and whatnot. But in Blue Planet, what you're doing is you're picking an origin, meaning where did you come from? Where did your family come from? Where did your genetic heritage come from? Right? You have a variety of different locations on Earth, or it can be in space, or it can be on Poseidon and in different cultures or in corporate states on Poseidon. Then you pick 2 backgrounds. So for example, you could be born on Earth, but your background is not like everybody on Earth is the same person. Yeah. So you're born on Earth, but your background might be you grew up in the wilderness and on a farm. Yeah. Right. So Earth gives you a certain number of points and a certain type of range of skills that almost everyone from Earth knows a little bit about. And then this background of being a farmer, and then maybe going from a farm to a university, right? Because you pick 2 backgrounds. You can have some knowledge of the farming stuff and some knowledge of university stuff. And then you pick 3 to 5 professions. And those are like, what do you do for a living? Right. Yeah. So these combinations, these puzzle pieces that click together, each of those packages has a certain rating and a certain skill. Typically usually it's between like 1 and 3, but it can go as high as 5 for really exceptional professions. And you're just adding all those together. So if you were born as a native on Poseidon, you're going to have some, like, say, survival skill and some sailing skills. If you also take a native background, meaning you were not just born on the planet, you were raised in native villages, you're going to have some more of those things probably. Yep. Right. And then if you're had another background of, say, well, pick the one that I was kind of looking at, which is an urban background, meaning that I did have native family members, but I grew up in the back alleys of one of, Poseidon's larger cities. So I also have a little bit of a crime, a few points here and there and some crime stuff. And then I tried to get out of that by going into the local native militia and learning how to be a pilot, because I wanted to get out of the water and into the air, because it was fascinating.
That's very cool.
So all of those things, when you pick all these packages, they add all these skills together, and then you end up having this really interesting, unique for your character combination of skill points across a wide range of skills that make you interesting, but also broad. So there's a depth to your character. Yeah.
One of the things that I had trouble with when I was looking through this system in order to prep for this episode was the character points and how they relate to skills. I didn't read through the whole book, obviously, because there's a lot in this book. So I may have skipped over it, but I'm of the understanding that when you perform a skill, you have a skill rank, basically. Like say through all of these backgrounds and professions, you have a skill rank of 5 in a certain skill. What attribute attaches to that skill when you actually roll it?
And that's what I find interesting about the game, is that it's whatever is appropriate.
Okay.
And in many cases, it's not what you think.
Yeah.
So for example, let's see if I can think of some interesting combinations. So, if you're doing a computer check, you might think intellect.
Yes.
Right. So that seems like a pretty handy thing. But what if you're not trying to hack into something? What if you're trying to physically hotwire a computer, a vehicle that has a computer chip that runs it, but you have to get into an area of the ship to be able to manually be able to rewire this thing?
Okay.
So you might need a computer skill, right? It could be mechanics, could be electronics, could be something else, right? Let's say the moderator says like, "Oh, this sounds like an electronics," right? You're trying to hotwire, but instead of knowing the system, the electronics. How manually dexterous are you to be able to get into this space to be able to hotwire this thing?
Like, so where to go.
You might do electronics plus dexterity.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Or what if you need to power your way through something? Like, so mechanics. Okay, you have the knowledge of mechanics, but you literally need to pry something, this one piece of a engine open to get to something else. You might do build. Okay. Or you might do strength, which is one of the derived attributes, which is based on build. Okay. So, you can do what you want with the combination. It's not a given. It's not like computers is under intelligence.
Right.
It's whatever is appropriate to the situation that you're in, and that may change.
Yeah. Like another thing that I had kind of thought of as you were talking is I'm kind of looking at the medic type for my character. Yeah. And so if I was doing surgery with the surgery skill, but it was a long surgery, like a 12 plus hour surgery, that sounds like surgery plus endurance.
Yep. It could very well be surgery plus endurance. It's a great way to look at it. That's awesome. It's what ability, it's what attribute is most applicable at the time. Of course, intellect has something to do with it. Of course, manual dexterity has something to do with it. Yeah. But what if the narrative is telling you that, okay, the person has got this critical wound, and this bullet, you've decided that this critical wound that was rolled is this bullet right next to the spine, because the moderator wants to make it more complicated in some way and make it more interesting dramatically. Then you can say, well, no, it's manual dexterity. And you might be like, not my best. I'm really good at knowing what I'm supposed to do with the medicine, but can I get in there to get it done? That makes sense. Is the challenge, right?
That's very cool.
Yeah. Another thing there's a few things that I find interesting. They have an awareness attribute, which is basically like perception in other games. But he breaks it down. The system breaks it down into chemical awareness, hearing, intuition, touch, and vision. Chemical being smell and taste, right? Okay, that makes sense. Hearing is obvious. Touch is obvious. Vision is obvious. But intuition is also something that you might roll. And in particular, because of the way that that dolphins and whales were uplifted. I had mentioned this at one point earlier, this idea that cetaceans were uplifted. Part of that process involved basically removing this barrier between their subconscious or intuitive mind and their conscious mind.
Yeah.
And they live entirely in this almost, I wouldn't call it a dream world, but they live moving into and out of conscious and subconscious ideas in a way that we don't.
Right.
Because of that, they have a natural increase to their intuition, right? So their intuition is like a +2 or +3 or something, depending on who it is, on what species of cetacean. Yeah. And in Ancient Echoes, again, which is their cetacean supplement, they talk about maybe allowing cetacean characters to make intuition rolls during the game to get certain insights into things as they piece together both sensory information and intellectual information in a subconscious way to get clues about things, which I think is really interesting to me.
No, that's fascinating.
But your awareness score covers all of those senses. So say if I had an awareness of 0,
yeah,
right? And all of my other sub ones would also be 0. You can choose to, without spending any points of any kind, you can choose to increase or decrease any individual one of those as long as the average turns out to be 0.
Oh.
So if you wanted to have really good eyesight,
you
could bring that to a +2 and then say bring down, chemical and intuition or something by 1 each. And it allows you just to have a choice. You can just choose to make them go up and down. So because they're averaging out about the same, right? And you can do that to a certain extent, which I think is really interesting, particularly when you're playing cetacean characters that involve so much in their hearing and their eyesight's not as great, right? So it's solid, it's good enough, but their hearing is much more impressive.
Okay, so when we're playing or when we're actually creating the characters, and it says, okay, you start with these plus and minuses as your species that you selected. And we're playing exceptional characters. So that means you have 3 attributes that you can increase, or you can put 3 points into your attributes.
You can put 3 points into something, right?
And so if I put one of those points into awareness and it started at 0, now my awareness is 1, and the average of all those is now 1.
Yes. So all of those would become 1, and you could go up and down with it from there. That's exactly right.
I know where one of my +1s is going.
So that's how that ends up going. And then you're going to, once we get pick all of our origins, our backgrounds, and our professions, you're going to have a basic level of skill in a wide range of stuff. Okay. So the stuff that I picked, I have a native origin, I have a native and that street background I was talking about. And for professions, I put a point in crime because I had actually had to survive on the street a little bit and had to maybe do some questionable things. Okay. I had 1 professional level in survival, and then I put 3 out of the 5 that I had into expert aerospace, which is my professional military training, or at least the native militia training to become a pilot. Oh, okay. So all of those things together, between the native and the survival and that kind of stuff, like my fishing ended up being 6. My orienteering ended up being 4, but the criminal elements and the military training elements ended up having my, like stealth skills actually had some points in them. Oh. I've got a few points in meteorology actually, which is from the expert aerospace, learning about weather patterns and flight and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I even have a point in law because I had a little bit of crime background. Now, my skill level in law right now is only 1. I haven't spent my 10 points yet, which means that I'd have to roll a 1 on a D10 to get a skill, to get a success. So I don't have much knowledge of it. Okay. But one of the things that they also talk about in the game is just, you can be like, okay, well, this is what somebody with any training in law would know. Right. And you can just tell people that without having to make rolls for everything, right? You don't have to roll on everything.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. And then even though your character, you were talking about being a medic, my character also has several points in first aid because, again, survival background, living out in the wilderness background, military background. So I'm actually not terrible at just basic first aid. Right. So it allows me to have some skill in that without overshadowing you, but also giving my character some more depth than I'm just the pilot.
That makes sense. And it sounds like when you are doing your attributes, you can lower some of them from your base attributes and then raise others. So you're not stuck with just those 3 points. you're
Right.
stuck with those 3 points. Plus, you can lower some and raise some other compared to a chart that's in the book.
Yeah, and the chart's pretty straightforward. Like, raising them and lowering them. It's basically a point for point system until you start getting into like, +3 above what your baseline is. Then it's a little more expensive, but it's basically a point by point system.
Yeah, that sounds right.
If you want to play a regular human, or a modified human, and you want to be in good shape and kind of be a broad-shouldered, big human, then by all means, you can buff up your build. And then, if you want to play to the stereotypes, you could, reduce your agility by 1 or reduce your intellect by 1 or whatever, and do that. So there is quite some variety. And once the whole character generation system is really telling you, where did you come from before you started doing this game? Like, who are you before you start? And you can look at that and have a better grasp of that.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess, you talked a little bit about your background. I talked a little bit about what role I kind of wanted to be. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the attributes and a little bit about the skills as well, about how those combine.
Yes.
So I was kind of thinking, going into this, of creating a cat character. Mm-hmm. So
one of the hybrids.
One of the hybrids. I don't know why, aside from it's just fun to play weird things. So
yeah.
I think I'm going to make a cat, and I'm going to try to make them a medic of some sort.
That's perfect. And the hybrids are pretty rare in the general populace, which is something to keep track of, like, while you're playing the game. But of course, all the unusual stuff is pretty attractive to players. So when we show up on a place, if you're a hybrid, then it's going to be something noted. And as part of the game too, you're not like, you don't look like a cat. You look like a human with some feline features.
Yes.
Right. If you're playing a Silva, you don't look like a gorilla. You look like a human who's got like a more prominent brow and maybe extra facial hair. Right. And a really, really buff build. Yes. It's just important to note that these genetic modifications are bits and pieces of animal genetics that have been spliced into human genetics. This was before the xenosilicate long john was discovered. These hybrids were done basically before that, which was more crude genetic engineering than we developed later.
Yeah.
Giving people a few ideas of what, like, say, some of the origin packages are. There's a bunch of them. But one of them could be you're from the moon, like our moon.
Yes.
So Luna. The tall and graceful, many lunars are employed by the incorporate, but fiercely maintain their independence. Okay. So there's a reference in the game a lot about incorporates or incorporate states. And so after we originally sent some colonists to Poseidon, we were intending to send backup supplies and stuff to Poseidon and more colonists, but then Earth had this ecological disaster that lasted, as Jeff said, like 75 years.
Yeah.
And then what happened is that corporations started buying failing countries.
Oh.
And so the actual Earth is now run by corporations called the incorporate states that have bought huge chunks of failing countries and have built them up as corporations.
Oh, it's very cyberpunky.
It's very cyberpunky, right? So the incorporate states all have different. They also want the xenosilicate, and they want to populate Poseidon and that kind of thing. So you could have an incorporate background. So you were raised or in and around one of these organizations, right? Mm-hmm. You could live in Earth orbit. It could be one of your origins. You could have been a colonial, meaning someone who came during that second wave. Uh-huh. You're not a native, but you're a colonial, and that colonial can be a pioneer. So you can live out in the wilderness, but you weren't born there necessarily, or your family was kind of but they were later. Or you can have a colonial like urban liver. You came to Poseidon to get away from something on Earth, and you live in the big city, and you don't want to go in the water. You don't care about the water.
Yeah.
Right? You want to run crime, or you want to run a business, or you just want to get away from something on Earth that you managed to buy your way onto the ship to get here. Right. So there's lots of different origins that you can do.
Oh, there's so many. Yeah.
There's so many, and there's a couple of specialized cetacean origins as well.
Okay.
And then the background packages kind of play off that. So you can also say, for example, you could have a background that's also incorporate.
Yep.
So you could live on Luna. You were born on Luna, and that's where your home growing up culture was. But then you were really associated with, an incorporate company that maybe had a business interests on Luna. Right.
Okay.
Some of the other ones are like rural, university, street, right? So say you have Luna, and then you were born in, around, and within an incorporate state, like, city on the moon, and then you went to university.
Yep.
So there's your origin and two backgrounds. And then your professional packages are basically, what did you study at university? And it could be anything. Yeah. And that's where it really gets huge. So it's arts and entertainment, it's administration, it's crime, it's diplomacy, it's athletics, it's law enforcement, it's medicine, it's just military, survival, it's any kind of stuff you want to do for those professional packages are much broader.
That makes sense.
And again, these are all puzzle pieces that fit together to make your foundation for your unique combination of a background character. And when you start the game, you already have this idea of who you are and how you got there, which I think is really nice. And other games sometimes don't have that. You're trying to figure that out as you play, which is also fun. But this gives you a different grounding.
Yeah, that makes sense. Very cool. Okay, so I think we probably know enough to go through all of the character selections. Is that correct?
I think so.
Very cool. All right, so we'll just select our attributes and all of the profile stuff and training packages, and through the magic of podcasting, we will be back shortly.
Make it sound coherent.
Exactly. All right, so welcome back. All right, so basically, let's see, what were you thinking about, Amelia, for your character?
Do you want me to start with my species?
Yeah, please. We haven't heard that yet.
Okay. I am going to pick a dolphin.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it.
Very nice.
And now these, Rich, are like actual dolphins, not as opposed to the genetically modified humans that are like humans with feline features. This is a dolphin. It is a
straight up bottlenose dolphin or a orca, which is a killer whale. Those are the two basic species of cetaceans you can play from the basic book. Though I mentioned earlier that Ancient Echoes has 3 or 4 more belugas, pilot whales, and that kind of thing, commons, that have subtle variations and different culture. Actually, each of them has a different culture and history, and based on when they were uplifted and some other stuff. It's fascinating. It's such a good book.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it.
Wonderful. Very cool. Yeah, and I'm playing a cat person. Part of the what is it, the variant or whatever they're called? Hybrids, yes, the hybrid cat person. And like I said, I'm going for a medic. And Rich, what species and stuff did you select?
I'm picking the diver, which is a human aquaform that I mentioned a little earlier. They tend to have a thicker layer of fat for insulation. They have nictating membranes and modified eyes to be able to see underwater. And they have slight modifications to swimming. They're not nearly as good, even close, as a dolphin, but they're better than regular human swimming.
Very cool.
They can dive to any depth, and they can hold their breath for about an hour, and have some other minor modifications. Nice.
Yeah, I forgot to mention for mine that I come with 2 biomods effectively as a natural talent, I guess, which is amplified hearing and night vision.
Yes.
So I kind of start with those.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the things that are not, if there are these pre-generated packages, then you have these modifications. And I have the same thing. You can get increased blood oxygenation as a regular human.
Yeah.
And modify that. Allows you to hold your breath for 10 or 20 minutes, but it's not quite as good as a diver, but you can do that and just not be a diver. And that allows you to literally, and the holding their breath doesn't apply to just underwater. So you get tear gas or gas that's going on or other stuff, and you don't want to breathe that in and inhale poisons.
That's awesome. I really like that. Now, speaking of biomods, when we picked the exceptional biomods, it says 2 to 4 minor, 1 to 2 major. Is that what we start with?
That's what you start with.
Okay.
And then there is a monetary system of credits and that kind of stuff that you can use for the system. And I think of all of the things that are really 90s about the game, it's this kind of credity system that's for buying biomods and money. It's like another resource that is always, I think money is always overly complex in a lot of games.
Yeah.
And it's always not quite right.
Right.
It's not easy to relate to. Even in D&D or something like that with gold, it's like, well, how much does this magic item cost, and does it, and do we just throw it all out and we just give it, it's really tough. So there's some real specifics about how much things cost, and when you do get a biomod, like how much time it takes to get the biomod and that kind of stuff. So that granularity feels like the most 90s thing of the game more than anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I haven't picked any of my biomods yet, but I'll probably do that for when we post the characters online.
Yeah,
so everybody can see that. Because I know that we're pretty limited on time right now. I know Jeff will be back at some point to go over the discussion session. So what we'll do is we'll just put our biomods on our character sheets for when we upload them. So you at the home, you can go to our website and check those out under the character sheet blog section. So that'll be pretty sweet. Let's see.
After you do your species and you kind of figure out your base attributes and stuff like that, then usually it's picking the origins and the backgrounds and the professional packages.
Perfect.
Yes.
All right.
And I like these because it really groups all the skills together. So you don't have to spend a lot of time saying like, okay, if I have this kind of education, what skills go with that? I like that it's all right there in front of you and I don't have to spend a ton of time flipping through and figuring out.
And if you don't want to pick and choose your own things, there's actually a whole section in the book that's just called roles. Yeah. And if you want to call them anything close to classes, you can. If you're like, I don't know what all this is, I just want to play a corporate espionage dude, right? Like I just want to play some guy who breaks into corporate things and steals corporate secrets. Well, there's a role that just shows that and says, oh, well, if you want to do that, then consider taking these packages in this combination. And there you go. So it's just basically like a pre-made package. You can just take it if you want and then modify it how you want with your own points, and then you're good, right? Or I want to play a native insurgent, woman who leads a small group of insurgents against the colonists or whatever. Yeah. Then got the role for that, and it shows you kind of how to build that. It's really where to look.
Very cool. Well, I guess I've got all of mine selected.
Go for it.
Cool.
Tell us what you picked.
All right. So my training packages, I went for my origin was native. So I understand that the cat people and the Silvas, they haven't been here that long, about 20 to 25 years or so.
Right. Yeah. So the Silvas and the cats were a secret program that were military focused, and that's why there's not that many of them. But then they were outed. Like the company that made them were outed, and then the GEO, which is this big, kind of the heroic quote unquote organization, came in, freed them, trying to give them a place to live. Though they haven't been on Poseidon very long, they have been out for 20 or 25 years. So you could technically be a native, sort of, because your parents were born there. Yes, it might fit better into colonial rural, maybe. Oh God, I can't say that at all. But you can definitely figure out a native way of doing it, saying that you were on there and you consider yourself from the planet.
Yeah, I would say I consider myself from the planet, born and raised here by non-native parents.
But you would have probably been raised somewhere like where they wanted to get away from it all. Yes. And so lived in and around, like in a native village.
Yeah, so that's what I was picturing too.
More native than from anywhere else.
And I was kind of picturing my dad being kind of this medic as well.
Sure. So, it would be perfect.
So he probably said, okay, we're gonna go to this planet, and we're gonna find a small village, and we're gonna start a family while I help the village be medics and stuff, or being a medic. Yeah. And then I basically picked that up from him.
And he probably learned a lot about native healing and how the different things, because there's a lot of different bacteria. There's a lot of different cultural things that are there, a lot of different plants and medicinal things the natives have learned to use. So yeah, definitely. That sounds fascinating to me.
Very cool. Yeah. So I'll go with that. And then my backgrounds, I chose native and university. So I learned a lot of stuff from living here, and also after I quote unquote came of age and everything, I went to university and learned my professional skills, which I chose was medicine at the expert level and science at the specialist level.
Nice. Excellent.
Yeah.
So there's basically those three levels. So there's like the normal kind of basic level, right? Then you've got that specialist level and the expert level. Yeah. And you get 5 professions you can choose. Each level counts as one of those professions. So you picked one use 3 points for one and 2 points for the other.
Exactly.
Perfect. Right.
All right. Go ahead, Amelia. What did you choose?
Okay. So I also chose native for my origin. And then
and cetaceans were actually uplifted before they found this xenosilicate on Poseidon. So there were initial native dolphins and killer whales that came with the human modified, aquaform modified humans with the original settlement. So
awesome.
Perfect. Yeah.
We've been here since the beginning.
Right. Yeah. So you probably had several, I mean, your grandfather or grandmother or whatever was probably here before you were. So definitely feeling like this is your home.
That's cool.
And then for my backgrounds, I picked native and university. So born and raised here, and then had a formal education.
That's awesome. So it kind of sounds like we probably know each other maybe from college or from university, if that's something that would be interesting for our background.
Absolutely.
That'd be awesome.
I think that'd be really cool. Because since you both have native and university together, it's like, oh, we're both here, studying, but we have these unique backgrounds. And I think that Ryan, your character, would find hers fascinating because you're technically born here, but she's here. Like she's not really from here. So
I like that a lot.
I imagine her being fascinated by you because it's not usual. It's not common.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Nice.
And then what about professions?
For my professions, I picked dancer at the expert level.
Oh, nice.
And then I picked diplomacy at the specialist level.
Oh, that's awesome. See, and that works out really, really well too, because of the way that dolphin culture works in the world as well. Because there's the oral part of being like a diplomat, right, that we think of, but the way that dolphins and humans interact are different within their own cultures and other cultures. Yeah. Right. And physical expressions are really key to dolphin communication, as well as, just echolocating and what they call sound pictures and all that kind of stuff. So basically, like, this expert dancer is almost as if you're also an expert orator in a way for dolphins, which I think is really, really cool.
Yeah, which is kind of how I pictured it, as like movement being incredibly important to the sort of language interpretation. And so putting the two together seemed to be a good cultural diplomat.
Which is important because we were talking about doing like an emergency rescue and response team.
Yes.
We're going into a wide range of areas, then it would be good to have somebody to do the talking, no matter what.
Definitely.
And especially someone with a native background.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have a lot of that.
Yes.
Because I also took the native background.
Oh, nice.
And but I went a bit of a different direction. As opposed to university, I actually was raised in a poor part of one of the major cities on Poseidon. And so I think what happened is that my family lived on one of the islands near Sierra Nuevo, which is where the Civil War is happening. And we were run out of that due to the war, and had to find some place just to live.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, though I don't usually do like orphans in my games for my characters, I think my character ended up having to maybe live with an uncle or an aunt somewhere in a big city, because my parents had been killed in this conflict and just had to survive in the street for a while and then work his way out of that.
Okay.
By joining the native militia and learning how to become a pilot, because even though he's a diver and loves diving, of course he does that all the time. So all he can think about is being in the sky. Yeah, exactly. You want the thing that you can't have. Right. And so he learns how to be a pilot and fly and work with the militia.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah. But he's also got a little bit of that. He's got a little bit of crime. So I did one of my professional packages in survival because he's had to live both on the streets and out in the wild. One in crime. So he's got some basic criminal background stuff. And then the expert level in military aerospace.
That's awesome.
So he can pretty much fly anything.
Very cool.
So
that's really cool.
And then Jeff had told us a little bit about what he was going to do as well.
Yeah.
Which was a Silva GEO former military personnel. So someone who was also as a native kind of a thing like you. He was formerly a native culture GEO corporate liaison. And then had discovered that, what did he say? He said he had realized that even though he was part of emergency rescue teams, he's kind of an EMT with military training.
Yeah.
That there was an underserved population, which was the native population in zones like the Sierra Nuevo Civil War zone that were not being handled, which plays into my background beautifully because
yes, it does.
I want to go back into that space and help these people like I didn't get help when I was a kid.
Exactly.
And so he decided to kind of peel off a little from the GEO, get a little GEO funding, but start this independent operation with us, and probably met us at various times during his previous career to bring this team together, which I think sounds awesome.
Yeah. And I would imagine that he probably, or his character's female, she probably approached me to be a medic. And then we were thinking, well, we need a good diplomat of the group. And I'm like, hey, I know somebody.
Yeah. Well, I went to university with this amazing seat. Yeah.
This awesome friend of mine. And so we got kind of all pulled together because of Jeff's character.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I like that kind of pieced together origin story of our group.
Yeah. And I like the setup allows us to go into this Civil War zone. I know Amelia has mentioned that she loves this kind of socio-political aspect of the setting. She's nodding her head. So that would be that. I love the kind of native versus colonial political bent. Also, I love doing the rescue and medical and the exploration of unknown areas of the planet, which is really cool. So we can do all of that to maybe send into, rescue people or rescue something from a previously unmapped island kind of a thing.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, which I think is really interesting. Yeah. Very so now we have the kind of game we kind of want to run. Whoever's running this game for us, has some ideas of where to go. We're probably not dealing with crime lords, but we might with some smuggling, or maybe we get inadvertently and like we get a distress signal from a downed ship on an island. We go figure out what it is, and turns out it was some smugglers dealing with the Russian crime mafia that is in some of the major cities, and then maybe we get tied into that. Like, there's so many different stories that you can do with that.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds really awesome. And I think the only thing that we have left is our profiles and what we look like and all of that sort of stuff. So if we could go over that really quick, just the profiles and a quick description, that'd be cool.
Sure.
So for mine, my goal is altruism. So I think that's just like, you like helping people. Your goal in life is to help people. Motivation is compassion. I help people because I'm compassionate for their plight, and I want to help them be better and all of that sort of stuff. Attitude is optimistic, because no matter how much bad there is in the world, there's always hope. Player's choice. This was an interesting one because this is an added little quirk or feature of your character that's 100% up to you. So I took a little bit of time thinking about this, and I thought of he listens to classical music when he needs to focus. It's one of his little quirks.
I love it. I'm trying to figure out if that bugs my character or he likes it. I don't know yet. I'm not quite sure.
That's awesome.
And play. Yeah.
Yeah, and then just the way my character looks, I know the cat people have a very short hair, full body fur, basically. So I went with gray fur with black stripes. And eyes are blue. Hair color is black, and his hair is wavy. And the special trait of him, which is another interesting thing, they give you this special section of what your character is like. I picked a black patch of fur over my left eye. Just
Nice.
something specific that you would see kind of on a cat, because they can be all sorts of different colors in this setting, which is interesting.
Yeah. What about you, Amelia?
So for my goal, I picked enlightenment.
Oh, interesting.
I know. That's like kind of, it's a very Amelia choice. And I'm aware of that. It's fine.
Lean into it.
Yep.
I know what I'm about. And then for my motivation, I picked social. That seemed like a good fit for a diplomat to kind of
Nice.
just meet more people, learn about people.
Right.
And then for my attitude, I picked disciplined, because I think that's a thing that you would have to be as a dancer.
And a diplomat.
And a diplomat.
And diplomat. Yeah. You have to learn to
Dancing diplomat.
That's awesome.
the dancing diplomat.
Yeah.
Sounds like a horrible 70s TV show.
It really does.
I don't really have anything right now for my player's choice, or I feel like those are the kinds of things that I always want to kind of play out and see what happens, you know?
I like that idea.
Yeah, definitely.
And for look, I look like a dolphin.
Pretty much.
I mean,
What? All dolphins look alike?
yes,
What are you trying to say?
as a human, I'm saying to me,
But come on, her ultrasonic sort of communication, that's got its own flavor.
yes.
That's true. What might be unusual for you actually as a native, maybe you're a native, but because in a lot of cases, you're going to be dealing with a lot of native threats as well.
Mhm.
So a lot of dolphins and whales like have certain nips and cuts and, that kind of stuff. Maybe you are unusually not like that. Maybe as a dancer, you have either gotten modifications or gotten healed or done things so that you have very minimal amount of scarring. So it might actually be very difficult for us to tell that you were even a native at all. Like you're a native. You don't look like any native seed I've ever met.
That's really interesting.
That'd be interesting.
Oh, I like that.
Nice.
Very cool. How about you, Rich?
Yeah, for me, my goal is freedom for some obvious reasons, I think, from his background. Motivation is pride. He wants to be the best at this thing that he loves so much, which is flying. But I don't see that as an arrogance kind of pride. I think it's more of just like this motivation of like, I want to do this because I want to be in the air. And if I'm going to be in the air, I'm going to do it right. And I'm going to do it the best. Right. And then attitude optimistic, because he feels like what he grew up with can't get worse.
Yeah.
It's a little bit less more like there's always hope, and more like, no, I've seen hell. This isn't it. We're fine. Right. So I think that's more where his optimism comes from, instead of a pessimistic attitude about the world, which he may also have, but optimism about how things will come out. And then he's kind of like with many divers actually, and the way things are kind of described in the future and on Poseidon, he has a very Polynesian looking, he happens to be of Polynesian descent, but he is also very Polynesian looking, kind of that little bit heavier muscular build, comes from both his genetics as a diver, genetically modified dive, aquaform, and then his background as well.
Oh, very cool.
And then for special, I actually had the opposite of what I was sharing with Amelia, which is he's got a lot of scars.
Oh, okay.
Both from the war itself and living on the streets, and also having to wrestle with a few hungry locals.
Yeah.
So that's what I have.
Very cool. It sounds like we've got a pretty solid party here, especially when we consider Jeff with his Silva that is kind of our enforcer, from what it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah.
A little bit of muscle.
Yeah, because it sounds like Jeff chose a thing where if things really went down physically or firefight, his character would be able to help us out of that situation.
Yeah, and we've mentioned off mic at some point as well. This system it can be potentially pretty deadly.
Yeah.
In a way that things can get critical quickly. Like if guns are being pulled, something's wrong.
Yep.
Right. And so, but if it does go wrong, then Jeff's person is most likely to help us get out of that while the rest of us are running for our lives.
Yes. And I can help her out with any wounds that she incurs. And,
and we don't have a little bit, because I think he said that she's an EMT as well. So she might have some medical background, and I have a little first aid, and you've got the heavy medical stuff. So yeah, I like it. I really like it. I
really like how this group has come together. I really want to play this seriously.
I know. That's what we come away from every one of these saying, though. It's like, okay, I'm ready to play this now.
But now I really mean it. I'm just kidding. I mean it every time. Oh,
awesome. Well, I'm glad that you guys enjoyed that as much as I do.
Yeah, very cool. Well, and speaking of Jeff.
Work call, sorry.
Oh, no problem. Just in time for the episode closer, so we'll get to that in a second. Yeah, I like this.
Thank you guys so much for joining us for our Blue Planet character creation episode. Jeff, can you tell people where they can find you and anything else that you want to remind people of about yourself?
Of course. You can look up Biohazard on our website, biohazardgames.us, and you can reach me directly at jdbarber@gmail.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at biohazardjeff.
Wonderful. And how about yourself, Rich?
Well, you can find me on Twitter a lot. You can find me there for Descent into Midnight. You can find me there at DIMRPG. You can also find me that'll have a link over to my regular Twitter account, which is harder for people to remember, Umbral Walker. You can also find me at the YJ Files on Twitter. That's the most direct way to get a hold of me there. And you can find me there.
And thank you to everyone for listening. And please join us next time for our discussion episode.
Character Creation Cast is a production of the One Shot Podcast Network and can be found online at www.charactercreationcast.com. Head to the website to get more information on our hosts and guests, or even some of our character sheets. Character Creation Cast can be found on Twitter at CreationCast. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Bolter, and I can be found on Twitter at Lord Neptune. Our other host, Amelia Antrim, can be found on Twitter at Ginger Reckoning. Music for this episode is used with a Creative Commons license or with permission from the podcast they originated from. Further information can be found within the show notes. Our main theme music is Hero Remix by Steve Combs and is used with a Creative Commons license. This podcast is owned by us under Creative Commons. This episode was edited by Ryan Bolter. Further information for the game systems used and today's guests can also be found in the show notes. If you like the systems discussed and wish to purchase them, links to the products can be found in the show notes. Also, check the notes or the website for cool stuff to go with each character, such as dice or mixtapes. Thanks for joining us, and remember, we find that the best part of any role-playing game is character creation. So go out there and create some amazing people. We will see you next time. Character Creation Cast is hosted by the One Shot Podcast Network. If you enjoyed our show, visit oneshotpodcast.com, where you'll find other great shows like Campaign.
The Campaign Podcast is an actual play podcast where a small, consistent group of Chicago nerds get together to record role-playing games. It's hosted by Kat Cool and is currently set in the Star Wars universe using the Edge of the Empire gaming system. Join Kat as she leads a team of improvisers, James D'Amato, John Patrick Cohen, and Johnny O'Mara, on a character-driven storytelling campaign narrative.